Welcome back to the Buddhist Audio Bookshelf YouTube channel. Today, we delve further into the wisdom of meditation by Thanissaro Bhikku, also known as Geoffrey DeGraff. We deeply appreciate your support. Please take a moment to like and share this audiobook, helping us expand its reach and granting more individuals access to its profound insights. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for instant notifications when new content is released. Together, we can disseminate the teachings of meditation and mindfulness, fostering a community dedicated to enlightenment and inner peace. Your participation in our mission to make these transformative teachings universally accessible is truly invaluable. Let's begin today's reading. Scramble the image. December 9, 2014. A common habit when you focus on the body is to tense up at the spot where you're focused, which may help maintain the focus for a while, but it's going to cause problems in the long term. It blocks the flow of the blood, makes you uncomfortable, makes it hard to stay. So you've got to think about your focus in a new way. Instead of thinking that you're outside the area, boxing it in, you're inside the spot that you're focused on. And you're radiating relaxation out in every direction. Try to hold that perception in mind wherever you're focused. As for any little patterns of tension that may come up, just see if you can breathe through them. Think of the breath as a solvent that dissolves them away. Then keep watch. See what kind of breathing helps with this kind of focus. Breathing too heavily can be unpleasant. Breathing too lightly can make it hard to stay focused, especially in the beginning. That is, your ability to stay focused with a sense of relaxation gets more skillful, and that you're more used to it, then you can stay there as the breath gets more and more subtle, until it seems like it's not coming in or going out at all. That's perfectly nah. You're not going to die. The body will breathe if it needs to. The fact that the mind is doing a lot less work means you're using a lot less oxygen, so the need to breathe is reduced. And if you ask where you're going, you're not going anywhere. You're going to stay right here. You want to be in charge right here, established right here. Then just try to notice if anything comes up that's going to dislodge you, that's going to pull you away. Once you feel really established here, then you're going to notice any movement of the mind that goes out in any direction. If you're not yet well established, you'll probably go with it. But as you get more and more used to being here centered in this feeling of relaxation, this feeling of openness, there'll come a point when you realize that you don't have to go with the mind as it runs out. You can see it run out for a little ways, and then it stops because you're not running with it. If you run with it, you can take it all around the world several times. But if you don't run with it, it goes out just a little tiny way, and then it stops. It's like a ashlight beam that can go only so far. But if you're carrying the ashlight and you want to see the end of the beam, you go running after it. That, of course, just keeps the beam going further and further and further away. But if you stay right here, it goes only so far and then it stops. And you begin to notice that as thoughts form, they form right at the spot where the mind and the body seem to meet. In fact, it's hard to say whether the original stirring is a mental stirring or a physical stirring. It's an as yet uncommitted stirring right there in your awareness. A little knot, a little swiggle. If you slap a label of physical or mental on it, it'll go in that direction. Before that happens, though, see if you can comb it out. It's like a knot in your hair. You comb it out with the breath and with your powers of perception. You may begin to notice that there's a word associated with that little knot or a little picture. And you can attack it either from the side of the breath, or you can attack it from the side of being a picture or a word. Either way, scramble it. You've probably seen images on a TV where things are going nah. It looks like a person talking on the TV screen, and all of a sudden everything gets scrambled into dots of color. Well, try that with every image that comes up in the mind, once you're well established, and there's a sense of well-being inside, so that you can step back from the movements of the mind, and just watch them as processes. Instead of thinking about how you're going to gain some pleasure out of this thought or that perception, simply step back and see, oh, these are just processes in the mind. They come and they go. They form and then they disband. See what happens if you speed up the disbanding a little bit by scrambling the image. Anywhere you tend to notice an image forming, scramble it before it even turns into anything that you could recognize. And see what happens. Try not to lose your foundation here with the breath, or with the sense of the body. You'll begin to notice that you have a greater sense of control over things going on in the mind. A thought forms and you don't have to be subjected to whatever it's going to be or going to do to you. You also know, though, that there are some thoughts that you tend to like to follow, old video clips that could be either things that actually happened, or things that you would have liked to have happened, that you want to happen in the future, or just things that you entertaining right now. Things that the mind goes toward either because of lust or greed or anger or whatever. When you try to scramble those images, part of the mind will resist. It wants to protect them, saying, "Don't touch these things." You can throw a lot of things out of the attic, but these things have to stay. And if you listen to that voice, you never get down to, "Well, why are you so protective of that?" Go ahead and scramble the image. This is one way of digging up unknown attachments or some old known attachments that you now decide you're going to take on. And see what the mind has to say. Whatever comes up, good, bad, indifferent, whatever, scramble it. Some of the forest agents say that if you have an image of the body, think of having a knife that you can use to cut through all the tendons, all the connecting tissues. You could start out by going through the image piece by piece like that, as with the reaction on the parts of the body. But then say, "Okay, what are these parts of the body made of?" And you chop them up and atomize everything. See how the mind responds. You want to do this when you're in a relatively calm space, so you don't immediately side with the hungers that go after the various images that you've used to entertain yourself. Some of them seem very deeply lodged, but if you make your stillness of mind deeper than that, then you can begin to understand. The mind tends to entertain itself with these images, tends to play with them, but what does it get out of them? Nothing. Just these little images that it stitches together, reactions on the water that it tries to stitch into a story. Ajahn Lee says it's like watching a movie. And there are two ways you can watch the movie. Either you can follow the story, and it looks like there really are people or events up there on the screen that you can recognize, and you can make sense out of, and that can get you stirred up. Or you can decide, "I don't need to make sense out of this. I just want to watch this as an exercise in ashes of color. Red, yellow, orange, white, green, blue." And if the thought was indifferent, well, nah, you just make sure that that hasn't kidnapped your concentration. If it's not so indifferent, if there's more of an emotional pull to that particular image, then it's even more important that you learn how to scramble it. After all, that's how you dig out the mind's ideas about why it needs to protect those things. You can expose them to the light of your awareness, the light of your alertness. This is one of the ways in which discernment, strengthened by concentration, digs down into things and NDS the root causes. Once you can see that there's really nothing there in terms of the root cause, in other words, nothing you'd really want to follow when you come right down to it. That's when you can begin to free yourself from the stress and suffering that can come from your fascination with these things. Thinking. September 15, 2015. Dogen had a nice definition for meditation, which is dethinking your thinking. You're trying to take apart the concepts that you carry around with you, especially the ones that are causing you to suffer, and a lot of these concepts you believe in, very lie. They're what the Thai Ajahns called samit, from the Pali samadhi. They're the conventions by which we communicate with one another, make sense of our world around us, especially in the social sphere, through the agreements we have, both within ourselves and with other people. The word red has a certain meaning. The word blue has another meaning. Like, dislike. All the concepts of language are things that we learn to agree on with one another, to use when we deal with one another. We also carry a lot of those concepts inside. We have lots of beliefs about ourselves, about how we run things inside our minds, sometimes skillful, sometimes not, particularly if you come from an unhealthy environment, which a lot of America is now. Many of the concepts you bring inside for dealing with your own thoughts, figuring out what's going on inside, are actually harmful. So you want to learn how to dethink those thoughts. It's not a matter of just putting them aside. It's a matter of taking them apart, questioning them. At RST, to do the proper questioning, you have to get the mind in a good place. That's why we practice concentration, so that you can dethink your thoughts not out of desperation or from neurotic dislike for them, but from a place of balanced well-being. You put the mind in a good place and then, from there, you can gaze back at the ideas you've been carrying around, and you can ask yourself with some objectivity, are those really helpful right now? Even something as simple as the notion of facing forward. Close your eyes. The body has a sense of forward and back, but why does the mind have to carry that in? We tend to think of the mind as being like the eyes that face forward. But what happens if you think of the mind just as being a radiance going out in all directions, and all directions are equal? Then, of course, there are concepts about the breath. I don't know how many people have said, there's no way breath can go through your nerves. How does air go through nerves? Well, breath here isn't air. It's energy, and there are many layers of energy in the body. Our society doesn't encourage us to look at these layers of energy or provide us with any coherent way of thinking about them. So here is one way you can rethink your thinking. Think of your sense of the body here as just breath. Everything you know about the sense of your hands, your feet, your legs, your torso, your head. Just tell yourself that your RST perception of these things is energy. Then, from that, the perception goes into the sense of being solid or warm or cold. So it's not like you're trying to push the breath through the solid parts. You're just allowing the breath to come RST. Give it priority. And let those other things fall into the background, because, after all, the breath is what allows you to sense these things to begin with. This becomes a useful way of dealing with pain. Pain tends to get glommed together with the earth element, your sense of solidity in the body. Of course, that makes the pain seem solid. So to get past that, you learn how to question the solidity of the pain. You experience the breath before you experience the pain. Think of it in that way. We have a subconscious tendency, when there's a pain, to allow the pain is second. And the breath is something other than pain. It's a physical element, but pain is something else. It's that sharpness, that heightened sense of displeasure or discomfort. But once you untangle it from the solidity of the body, you begin to realize it's a lot more fluid and insubstantial than you thought before. Ajahn Chah has a nice analogy. He says it's like you're sitting in the one seat in the house, and all the other things that come have no place to sit down. They're there at your pleasure. They come and they go, but you're the one in the seat. You're in charge. Thinking of the breath this way puts you more in charge of what's going on in your sensation of the body. You are here RST. The breath is here RST. The pain is secondary. It's not the case that the pain has moved in and laid claim to it and pushed us out, unless we allow ourselves to be pushed out and give the seat up to it. We were there RST. The breath is there RST. Once you can start taking apart your thoughts and perceptions about the body, you can do that with thoughts and perceptions about other things as well. A thought comes up and you can recognize it as a voice from someone in your family, someone in school, or somebody in the media. Or it's one of your old elements. In other words, your identity in the past that wants to come back. That's why the Ajahns personify the elements, because you gave them personality by assuming them as your identity. Learn to question that. When these things come in and say things, ask yourself, what if the opposite is true? And why do I have to believe those concepts anyhow? When I was in Thailand at Wat Asakaram, we'd have Dhamma talks every night. They had a rotating roster of monks. And out of the 14 monks on the roster, maybe 2 could give good Dhamma talks, and the rest were boring. Not very insightful, not very helpful. So I made a game of it. Even though I could hear the talk, I was going to very definitely not understand it. It was just going to be sounds, sounds, sounds. A word would come and I wouldn't connect it with the word before it, and I wouldn't connect that one with the word that came after. When you do that, you ND that the mind can quiet down a lot faster. Well, you can try the same trick with your own thoughts. Just think of them as gibberish. Cut the connections between them. Think of them as a foreign language. You don't have to take on their concepts, because often when you take on their concepts, you take on their grammar, too, which creates a kind of reality. Again, this is what they call samad in Thai. Conventions, supposings, agreed on meanings. It's interesting that the Thai word for convention also means a supposing. You suppose things into being. You make those agreements for useful purposes, but you don't have to agree with them all the time. You can say, for the time being, I'm just going to be here with the breath and I don't have to agree with any other thought that comes in, any other language that comes in. As soon as a thought appears, think of it dissolving away. Think of it exploding. Pains arise in the body. Think of them being dispersed. You're not clamping down on them, because all too often that's what we do. A pain comes in and our instinctive reaction is, how can I make sure this doesn't spread? And so we tense up around it, thinking that that's a way of keeping it from spreading. Of course, that actually creates extra pain. So instead of thinking of the pain as a thing, think of it as just these moments that come and go. They're whizzing past and they're going away from you. Instead of thinking that they're coming at you from the front, think of them as coming at you from behind. You've got the right to think of them in those terms. As soon as you realize that they're there, they're going away from you. That loosens up a lot of the tightness and tension, a lot of the sense of being burdened by these things, being attacked by these things, of being on the receiving end. You don't have to receive them. They're not guests. You're not obliged to be polite with them. You're sitting here with your eyes closed and you've got the one seat in the house. You don't have to have anything to do with anything else. See how many of your conventions and supposings and internal agreements you can put aside, at least for the time being. You can dethink them. Flip them around. Turn them inside out. Just think of them as being gibberish right now. The only thing that's real is your sense of awareness, very clearly here with the sensation of the breath, the sensation of energy here for the body. Eventually, you'll want to dethink that, too, but not yet. Use that RST to dethink other things. That way, the things that have long had a hold on the mind don't have a hold anymore, because you're not holding on to them. This is like the Buddha's image of Re. Fire feeds on its fuel and clings to the fuel and, as a result, is stuck on its fuel. It's interesting that a lot of ancient cultures perceived Re as clinging. The I Ching talks about Re as clinging as well. And of course it clings. Take a stick with an aiming end and try to shake the Rio of the stick, and you'll see that the Re holds onto the stick, no matter how much you swing it around. It clings, and as a result, it's trapped. And then, as they say in Pali, it gets freed when it goes out. It's freed because it lets go. How are you going to be free of your thoughts unless you learn how to let them go? You won't gain any freedom until you give them their freedom to go. You keep digging them up and hanging on to them, digging them up, hanging on to them. They present themselves and you immediately turn things into the type of reality that TS into your conventional, supposed, agreed on notions of reality. And that places lots of limitations on you. So learn how to question those agreements. Say, I'll use those agreements when they're necessary, use those supposings, those suppositions, when they're necessary, but right now they're not. Why carry them around? They'll come back when you need them. A lot of those things you don't need right now. All you have to do is be aware of the breath. It's all around you. It's bathing you. It's not the case that you're on one side of the breath facing forward looking at the breath. It's all around you. So try to have an all-around awareness of this all-around element and see how that changes the dynamic inside. Training your cynical voices. March 18, 2014. Training the mind is work. Greed, aversion, and delusion have gotten very well ensconced in the mind, and it's going to take a lot of digging to get them out. The reason we're sitting here meditating is because at least some of the voices in the mind say, yes, you can do this, or, yes, you can ND some peace of mind this way. But when they start getting to work, other voices in the mind get stirred. The cynics, the skeptics, the ones who don't want to do the work, who want an easy way out of the work, either by doubting the teaching or by doubting your ability to practice the teachings. And yet the cynical voices do have their uses. You have to learn how to apply the cynics to your greed or your aversion or your delusion or any other unskillful attitude that comes up in the mind. Those are things you really have to question. So a lot of the training lies in learning when to use the cynics and when not. Laziness is a big problem that you have to be cynical about. The voices that say, you can't do this are largely motivated by a desire to be let over the hook. They say, well, I'm incapable of doing this. The old story about the game leg. I've got this game leg that makes it impossible for me to do this or that job, regardless of whether the leg is game or not, or of whether the job requires a good leg. You've got to learn how to be cynical about that, skeptical about that. When the mind says, you can't do this, how much effort have you actually put into this? How much are you really trying to do the practice? As Ajahn Lee once said, there are only 4 jhanas. There are people who can run corporations with thousands of workers and develop land stretching for thousands of acres. Yet here, all we have are just 4 jhanas, and we can't figure out where they are or what to do with them or how to end them. It's work, but it's good work, and often pleasant work. And even when it's not all that pleasant, the fact that it's heading you in the right direction, and you're doing noble, honorable things, makes it good work. So this is when you have to bring out your motivating factors, the I believe in you forces. Remind yourself of why this is a good thing, and how you're not being asked to do anything superhuman. There is a tendency to think of the Buddha and some of the great arahants as being superhuman, but they were human beings. At some point in their career they had all the problems you have and probably more. But they were able to turn themselves around, sometimes with help, sometimes without anybody there to help them at all. The most someone else can do for you is to provide you with advice, provide you with a good example, and create a good atmosphere. From there, the work is yours. Ajahn Fuang noticed that his students, when he was not in Bangkok, had a lot of trouble meditating on their own. But when he was there, their minds could settle down. He realized he had to create an atmosphere for them, and that's what he was doing as he sat there and meditated with them. In the same way, we've tried to create the right atmosphere here at the monastery. This is a quiet place. People live virtuous lives here, and that creates a good environment for the practice. There are the teachings, and there are good examples all around you. So, as much as other people can do for you, they're doing it. Now it's up to you to do the remaining work yourself. And what are you asked to do? Look at the Noble Eightfold Path. Try to develop right view. Try to develop right resolve. The resolve not to stay stuck in your sensual fascinations, not to stay stuck in harming yourself or harming others, or having ill will for yourself or ill will for others. There's nothing really superhuman there. In some cases it takes a lot of effort. Sensuality is one of the hardest problems for the mind to overcome. But there are people who can do it. And even if you don't get all the way there, the fact that you've learned to curb your sensuality, or your fascination with sights, sounds, smells, tastes, tactile sensations, as opposed to the qualities of rapture and well-being that can come just from inhabiting the body. It's all to the good. Right speech, right action. You're asked to avoid things that are harmful. Again, it's not superhuman. Right livelihood. Earn your livelihood in a way that's honest. The real work comes in those last 3 factors of the path. Right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. But these are all things that you can do. What are you asked to keep in mind? Your body, your feelings, mind states, mental qualities. Things that are right here. You keep them in mind so that you can sort out what's happening in the mind, what's happening in the body, and you can figure out what to do with it. This is what the right effort is, or the ardency in right mindfulness. When unskillful mind states come up, you learn how to drop them, drop them, drop them. If they keep coming back, you drop them some more. What usually happens is you get tired before they do. But they can wear out, too, you know. You've got to have some confidence in yourself that you are a human being, and you're being asked simply to commit yourself to doing something that human beings can do. As for skillful mind states, they're good things to develop. The mind gets clearer, sharper. This is a path where you're asked to do nothing but good things. Try to be aware of your body. Again, you're not being asked to be aware of something that's far out there in the abstract. It's something right here, right now. And it feels good to inhabit the body, it feels good to be with the breath. As for right concentration, if thinking about jhana is causing problems one way or another, put it aside. Nobody gets into jhana by thinking about jhana. You get into right concentration by focusing on your breath, focusing on the body. You don't have to think about directed thought and evaluation. You just do them. Evaluate your breath. If it's not good, change it. Keep coming back to the breath again and again and again. Keep exploring how you can breathe in a way that really feels gratifying. As for the stages of concentration, they'll come on their own when you're working with the breath like this. So there's nothing superhuman about what you're doing here, simply that you've got to learn how to train those committee members and turn the cynical or skeptical voices on your greed, aversion, and delusion. At the same time, learn how to bring in some more confidence, conviction in this path. For most of us, it's not a path that we learned about when we were growing up as children. It's something new. And as a result, it often can feel foreign. But what's really amazing about this path is that it's common to human beings all over the world. All these qualities, starting from right view through right concentration, are things that you can develop regardless of your background. Now you may have different problems coming to it. And we tend to think in the West that we have some special problems that we bring to this, and maybe in some cases we do. But a lot of times it's just the same old stew rehashed again and again and again. You read about the people who disliked the Dhamma back in the time of the Buddha, argued with it, resisted it. And a lot of their resistance was the same sort of stew you see now. They were materialists, they didn't believe in the power of karma, thought that going to Nibbana was impossible or sh. But were they the people who been dead from hearing the Buddha? No. The Buddha taught noble truths. The word Ariya, which we translate as noble, also means standard or universal. They're true all over the world. The problem is simply a matter of learning how to relate to them in a way that's as natural to you as just breathing. Start with the breath. Start with your actions. Notice where you're doing things that are harmful, thinking in ways that are harmful, speaking in ways that are harmful. Figure out ways to stop causing that harm, and then your thoughts and your words and your deeds will begin to fall in line with the path. It's nothing foreign, nothing superhuman. But it is work. So you have to be very careful about the voices that tend to get lazy. There's the critical voice that says, you're not doing things well enough, and partly that's right. If you'd totally mastered these skills, you'd be an arahant. But the part that says, you can't do this, that's the part you have to watch out for. It sounds so convincing, but it doesn't have any proof. It can point to times in the past when you've not done very well in the meditation, but that's not proof that you can't do it now. One of the attitudes the Buddha has you develop is seeing that other people can do this. They're human beings, they can do it. I'm a human being, I can do it, too. That's the attitude you want to develop. So learn how to sort out these voices in the mind and guru out which ones to apply to which problems. Be skeptical about your cynical voices, as you should be skeptical about your greed, aversion, and delusion. There's a fair amount of aversion in the skepticism and the cynicism. And there's a lot of delusion, thinking that you'd be better off not doing the practice, or resting, not driving yourself so hard. What this comes down to is that you've really got to train your powers of judgment so that you judge things in a way that's helpful and not in a way that destroys the skill you're trying to develop. So learn to look at these voices from all sides. They have their uses and they have their abuses. When you can see that they're not totally bad or totally good, and you can sort out when they're bad and when they're good, that's when you can start to depend on yourself on the path. Boring. November 27, 2011. The voice that says, "This is boring." Why do we believe it so easily? Lots of other voices come into the mind and you can listen to them and not get involved. But the one that says, "This is boring," seems to sneak right into you, and you identify with it immediately. So it's important that you learn not to do that and to be on your guard. Otherwise it takes over. You sit for a while watching the breath and a voice in the mind says, "This is boring, nothing's happening," and you can go and think about things you thought about who knows how many times, and yet not end it boring. You can think about food. How many of ours are there in food? Not that many, really. Sexual fantasies. Whatever your favorite fantasies may be. There are not that many variations in those fantasies. And yet we can go over them again and again and again, and not end them boring. Then there's aging, illness, and death. By now we should be really bored with them. Yet we keep coming back for more. But then when you sit down with the breath, which is your path away from this boring sewering that we've been going through all along, you very quickly get bored with that. There are basically two reasons for this. One is that you're not paying careful enough attention. There was an Ajahn in the forest tradition who once complained to Ajahn Lee, saying, "What is there to see? Where are you going to get any discernment out of watching the breath? It's nothing but in, out, that's all. What kind of discernment can you get from that?" Ajahn Lee replied, "Well, if that's all you see, then that's all there is." In other words, the problem is not with the breath, it's with the attitude you bring to it. After all, where did the Buddha end the awakening? Right here. At the breath. And his breath wasn't any different from ours. What was different was the attitude of interest and attention that he brought to it, because, of course, he wasn't watching just the breath. He was watching the mind in relationship to the breath, seeing a lot of subtle movements going on in the mind. Those are the really interesting things. And everything you need to know for awakening is right here. It's just that your powers of observation are not subtle and all around enough. And if you can't even see the subtleties of the breath, there's no way you're going to see the subtleties of the mind. So start questioning your attitude toward the breath. What's going on when you breathe in? What's going on when you breathe out? How does the in and out breath relate to the other breath energies in the body? There's a lot to explore here. If you ND that there are pains in different parts of the body, this is an excellent time to see how the breath relates to pain. What kind of breathing aggravates the pain? What kind of breathing helps to alleviate the pain? What ways of perceiving the breath either aggravate or alleviate the pain? Or if you ND that there's a sense of ease, you can play with that. Can you spread it around? Can you spread it out to every pore? Can you keep it going? How long can you keep it going? If, when you've kept it going for a while, the mind says, "Well, okay, enough of that," you have to say, "Why? Why is that enough?" If it were really enough, you'd be awakened. But you haven't gained it yet. So try doing something new with the breath. There's nothing you're going to learn by just doing the same things over and over and over again without trying any variations, without asking any questions. This is where insight comes from asking the right questions. Just as with science, new revolutions in science come from asking new questions, the kinds of questions that people prior to that time would just dismiss. For example, all the questions people started asking that led to chaos theory are things that people used to ignore. A dripping faucet, for example. Is there a pattern in the drips of a faucet? Most people just dismissed the question. Nobody ever learned anything from it. But then a group of physics students decided to ask, "Well, what if we made a graph?" They started observing the dripping faucet, and they began to see interesting patterns. Those patterns led to some important discoveries in chaos theory. So there are things going on all around you and inside you that you're not paying attention to. As a result, you don't learn from them. So when you ND yourself feeling bored, ask yourself, is there some way I could pay closer attention? Is there something going on here that I'm not curious about or not learning how to question, taking too much for granted? Because that's a lot of what the problems in the meditation are. Things that you just take for granted. They've got to be that way. Well, do they really have to? If your normal pattern is that you're sitting here for an hour, and it takes a good 30 minutes for the mind to gradually drift down, well, why? You know where you have to go. You know what you've got to do. Why does it require this long gradual drift? Can't you get right to the point at the very beginning and see how long you can stay there? Part of the problem is that you've made up a narrative about how the meditation has to go. And whether it's a good or bad narrative, you're comfortable with it. But it's a pretty boring narrative. So once you've found your spot, remember that. The next time you sit down, go right there, don't waste any time and see what happens around there. If you're afraid that you won't know what to do with all that extra time of stillness, ask yourself why you're afraid. When you probe into the matter, you'll learn some interesting things. So that's the RST thing you want to look for when you ND yourself listening to that voice that says, "This is boring," and you're getting ready to believe it. It's usually a sign that you're not paying very careful attention. Fabrications are going on. Perceptions are going on. All the aggregates are going on right here, and you're relating to them in your old ways. And as we all know, the old ways are the ones that cause you to sewer. There's ignorance there. There's something you're not looking into, some question you're not asking. So try to cast around and see what that question might be, the question that will allow for some new ways of doing things as you stay here with the breath coming in, the breath going out. If you need some added motivation to stay here, you can drop the breath for a little while and go to the other recollections. The recollection of the Buddha, the Dhamma, the Sangha. Recollection of death, the fact that it could happen at any time. Whatever recollection you ND gets you more motivated. Think about it for a while until you're ready to come back to the breath. And remind yourself, everything you're going to need is right here, simply that you haven't noticed it yet. As Ajahn Lee says, it's like walking back and forth on a path. A path that you follow often is one you start to get to know really intimately. If you pay attention, you'll notice subtle differences in the path that you would have missed if you had followed the path only once or twice. Otherwise, if you don't pay attention, if you just go on automatic pilot, you're never going to see anything, no matter how many times you walk the path. But the advantage of staying with the breath is that there are also the movements of intention right here in the present moment, and those are the things you've really got to watch out for. That's the Kamma in the meditation. All of the other factors that you need to understand, they're right here for you to observe again and again and again. If you let yourself get bored with them, you're never going to see their subtleties. You just tell yourself, okay, I've seen this before. I know this. Remind yourself, if you really knew these things, you'd be inerrant. You'd be free from sewering. So there's still something you don't know. That's one way of dealing with boredom. The other type of boredom is the one that comes over you when something is about to appear in the mind, and you don't want to look at it. You're about to uncover something important, but a part of the mind wants to keep it hidden, so it puts you to sleep. This is why the Buddha has you GHT drowsiness and not give in to it right away. Test it. Probe it. Challenge it. Change the way you breathe. Visualize a light right in front of you. Rub your limbs. If you have to, get up and walk around for a while, do some walking meditation. See if that wakes you up. But don't give in to that old habit that says, well, if there's drowsiness I might as well go to sleep right now. I must really need it, or if I'm drowsy, this meditation is not going to go well, I'd better stop. Sometimes something's about to come up, but the mind is hiding it from itself. So hold that thought in mind. I don't want to be afraid of whatever comes up, whatever the unattractive dilemma might be. If I don't let myself see it, I'm never going to be able to get past it. The problem is that part of you is identifying with that dilemma. All too often, we identify with all the wrong parts of the mind. This is why you identify with the boredom that's hiding something that's causing you to sewer. So you've got to remember, the things that you hold on to are causing you to sewer. However much you may like them, however much mileage you may get out of making them part of your internal narrative, you've got to remind yourself, If you ever want to get past the problem of soaring, you've got to be able to look at whatever comes up in the mind. So if there's a sense of drowsiness that comes with the boredom, take it as a warning sign. Something is being avoided in the mind. So those are the two primary things to look for when that voice comes up. This is boring. You have to ask, really? Well, let's stick with something that's boring for a while. We've spent most of our lives running away from what's boring, complaining about what's boring. So turn around and face it. Look at it carefully. Is it really boring? If it's part of the path, there's something interesting going on here that you're missing. What's really boring is the way that we keep giving into our old dilemmas again and again and again, and soaring again and again and again. You've got to ask yourself, at what point will you have had enough? Nobody else can ask that question for you. So you've got to ask it of yourself. Your intentions come first. June 12, 2015. The passages we chant before we begin to meditate are for the purpose of warming up your intention to sit here and meditate, to be with the breath for the whole hour. To begin with, we think about principles of karma. That the body is not going to stay with us, it's going to get old, grow sick, die, we'll leave our friends, all we've got is our karma. And that comes from the mind. So the mind needs to be trained to make sure that its karma is good. Then we have the reactions on goodwill, compassion, empathetic joy, and equanimity, to remind us that we want a happiness that's true, something that really lasts and doesn't harm anyone. The equanimity also reminds us that there is only so much we can do in the world, and that if we want true happiness, we need to go beyond karma. So these are some of the reactions that help us to get our motivation straight and get our intentions strong, because our intentions make a huge difference in how we're going to experience the next hour. You've got the body here, you've got the breath. And a lot of what you experience in the body and breath comes from old karma. As the Buddha said, all of our 6 senses should be experienced as old karma. But we're not just stuck with old karma. In fact, our present karma is something we experience prior to sensory contact. This is a peculiar point in the Buddha's description of causality. That intentions come prior to our experience of the 6 senses. In one sense, it's not peculiar. We can often see for ourselves how the way we have an intention in the mind is going to shape the way we experience things. If we're hungry right now, we're going to experience the world in one way. If we've had more than enough food, we're going to experience the world in another way. It all comes down to our intentions. What's strange about this is that your present intention, your present karma, is actually something that you experience prior to the results of your past karma. The contact at the 6 senses, which the Buddha identifies with old karma, comes further down the line. Yet all too often we go running to the contact and build on that, getting upset when the contact is unpleasant, forgetting that we have an opportunity here to shape things well from the very beginning. So take advantage of the fact that your intentions come RST. As the Buddha said, the mind is in the forefront of all things. The very RST verses in the Dhammapada say, the mind is the forerunner of all dhammas, it's in charge. So don't abdicate the fact that you're in charge. Take advantage of it. Make up your mind that you're going to stay here and keep that in mind. That's what mindfulness is for. It's to remind you that how you experience the next hour will depend on your intentions. So keep your intention really, really solid. You want to stay with the breath, and you want to do it well. That means you want to stay here continually. Now, it's not simply through willpower that that's going to happen. You need some help. Help comes in learning how to play with the breath, having a strategy for staying here. That's part of your intention as well. You can breathe in any kind of way, so how about breathing in a way that feels really, really good? A way that feels nourishing for the body, soothing for the mind, energizing when you're feeling tired, grounding when you're feeling scattered. There's lots to explore right here. So make that your intention. You want to explore what the breath can do for you here in the present moment. And try not to get waylaid. Something may come up, a pain or a particularly interesting thought. You have to keep reminding yourself. You're here for the skill of dealing with the breath. You're not here for those other things. You've had thoughts before, you've had pains before. You don't have to get all excited about them. Even if it's an amazing and original thought. If it's really that good, it'll be there when you come out of meditation. For the time being, though, you want to stick with your original intention no matter what. It's like those scenes in the movies where a person is given permission to go into a hall of treasures and then take one treasure out. The catch is that there are lots of other treasures in the hall as well, and the people who get distracted by the other treasures end up not getting anything at all. So keep your mind on the one treasure. You want to learn how to get the mind under your control. You want to learn to get the mind to be still and solid and clear, here in the present moment, with an awareness that's centered, but broad, not broad in the sense of running after things in all directions, but broad in the sense of having a wide range of awareness throughout the body. Make the body one sensation, i.e., the sensation of breath. Make that the one topic of your mind. As you experience the hands and feet, try to experience them as an aspect of breath. Every part of the body. Experience it is an aspect of breath. There will be still breath energy in some parts of the body, and moving breath energy in other parts. Ajahn Lee has a long list of the different kinds of energies. The ones that go back and forth, the ones that spin around in place. Also different levels of breath energy. Energy moving through the blood vessels, energy moving through the nerves, still breath energy that can be detected in some parts of the body. There's lots to explore. Make that your range. That's where you're going to wander. It's a limited range, going as far as the skin or a little bit beyond the skin. Sometimes you can sense an energy owing just around outside the body, like a cocoon. But make that the limit of your wanderings, and try to experience all as aspects of breath. This is what makes it into one object, your sense of the body right here, right now. As for any pleasures that may come up, any sense of fullness or unusual energies, learn how to deal with them in relationship to the breath. Some people sometimes end a tightness developing in the chest or an energy that seems to come out of left eld. Well, think of the tightness coursing out from the chest, going out the palms of your hands, the soles of your feet, so that it doesn't get stuck. Think of everything in terms of breath energy in the body, and that the breath energy is wide open and connected. The more connected everything is, the less need you'll feel for in and out breathing, and the stronger that sense of being one in the present moment becomes. The body is, and it's what LLS the mind. One of the terms for this is mindfulness immersed in the body. You're in the body, thoroughly, totally, with it all around you. As if you're sitting in a tub of water, and the water surrounds you. Make that your intention, hold to that intention. And you begin to see that intentions really do have a prior power over the results of your past karma. There may be little pains here and there, noises outside, whatever. But if you hold tight to your intention, those things are not going to lead you astray. You want to have that kind of determination. Because it's only through that kind of determination that the mind really gets solidly established. Still, clear, and in a really good position to gain insight. Insights are not things that you can intend ahead of time, but you can intend to get the conditions right. So always hold that in mind as you meditate, that your intention comes RST. Questioning your unconscious actions. December 28, 2015. We practice to overcome our ignorance. What kind of ignorance is it? The way you normally hear the Buddhist teachings explained, our ignorance is the kind of ignorance of someone coming out of amnesia whose questions are, who am I? Where am I? The answers that are usually given to those questions are these. Who are you? You're a bundle of the aggregates. Where are you? You're in samsara. But if you look more carefully at how the Buddha taught, those aren't the questions and so those aren't the answers. For example, in the Buddha's analysis of the V aggregates, they're not what you are. He said that they're activities, the activities out of which you create your sense of self, but that you should see them as not me, not myself, not what I am. And samsara is not a place. It's something you do, it's a wandering on. So the real questions aren't, who am I? Or where am I? The real question is, what am I doing? That's a different kind of ignorance. That's the ignorance of someone who's been doing something habitually and not really paying much attention, and suddenly realizing that what he's doing is causing problems. So as we meditate, that's what we're looking at. What are you doing? What have you been doing that's been causing suffering? Can you see the connection? Can you actually see the action itself? A lot of these actions are subconscious. To see them, you have to get the mind really quiet and have it focused in the right places and ask the right questions. When we think about subconscious acts, we usually think about the subconscious or the unconscious, or as things in my subconscious, as if it were a room in the mind, like the basement, whereas we're up here above, in the RST or second story. To see the subconscious, we think we have to penetrate the barrier of the ur beneath us. But the unconscious and subconscious are not spaces in the mind. They're activities that the mind does without being fully conscious of them, and there are a lot of those. If there are walls in the mind that prevent us from seeing them, we've put those walls up right before our eyes. What subconscious is not located in any particular hidden place. It's right here. It's simply that these things happen very quickly, they happen very subtly, and we've been doing them for so long that we don't even notice them. They're like the hum of a refrigerator. The refrigerator is right here with us, but it's been on all day, to the point where we don't really notice the hum. One of the reasons we look for inconstancy is to see the moments when the refrigerator turns on. Then you detect there was something there that you didn't notice because it seemed so constant. This happens on the level of the body, it happens on the level of the mind. The Buddha talks about bodily fabrication, which is a physical process, although the mind is involved in doing bodily fabrication through its intentions. He also talks about verbal and mental fabrications, which are more purely aspects of the mind. Bodily fabrication is the way you shape the way you breathe. We're doing this all the time. As the breath comes in, there's going to be something monitoring it that says, okay, that's enough. Now it's time for it to go out. If you look carefully enough at the mind, you'll notice that there are some perceptions of what level of breathing is enough. Some of this is on the purely chemical level, as when there's too much carbon dioxide in the blood, and the brain sends a signal to breathe in. Some of it, though, has more to do with how it feels, what kind of breathing feels satisfying right now. But because our attention is diverted elsewhere, we don't really notice what's going on. We don't notice the extent to which we're shaping this. This is one of the reasons why the Buddha has you focus on this as bodily fabrication. He tells you to be aware of the whole body as you breathe in, breathe out. As you do that, you begin to notice that there's more going on than just the air coming in and out of the lungs. There's a movement of energy. Certain muscles are expanded, stretched, others are contracted. They have a rhythm. But to what extent is that rhythm caused by things going on in the mind that you're not fully aware of? The best way to see that is to consciously change the way you think about the breath, to change the way you breathe, to go against what's subconscious. That's how you dig up some subconscious assumptions. There's a resistance. What's going on? What's resisting? If you ND that you're having trouble adjusting the breath because your perception is well, change your perceptions. This is where mental fabrication comes in and has an influence on bodily fabrication. When you breathe in, where do you think the breath is coming in? How does your mind picture the breathing process? Change the picture. If you're not sure what the picture is, use one of Ajahn Lee's pictures, such as the breath coming in at the base of the skull and going down the spine, down through the legs, coming in through the middle of the chest and going down through the abdomen. Or you can try other images as well. The breath coming in and out the eyes and going deep into the brain, or coming in through the top of the head and going down into the brain. Change the picture, change the image, and see what that does to the breathing process. The same with verbal fabrication. You're sitting here telling yourself, stay with the breath. There are other parts of the mind that'll say, no, go someplace else, I've got something else I want to think about. You don't see those other voices clearly until you've made up your mind that you're going to stay with the breath. Normally, we just drift from one thought to another. It's like boats out on the ocean. One boat comes near your boat, and you jump onto that boat, and then that boat gets near to another boat, and you jump on that third boat. Everything is just drifting around. It's all so smooth and seamless that it seems like a very natural process. But then you end yourself in the middle of the ocean. If you ask yourself, where have I been? How did I get here? It'd be hard to trace things back. But if you've got something really solid to hold on to, you can be more conscious of your motions as they bump into your initial intention. Make up your mind that you're going to stay right here with the breath. That gives you a point of comparison. When the mind goes drifting, you realize that it is drifted. Some people complain that when they meditate they begin to see what a mess their minds are. Well, the mind has always been a mess. It's not suddenly a mess because you're meditating. Ajahn Fuang's example is of a house that you normally don't clean. One layer of dust settles on the today, and then a new layer tomorrow, and a new layer the next day, and you don't see the layers of dust because they're just being added to the dust already there. But if you start cleaning the house, wiping down the every day, you notice every little speck of dust as it settles. It's the same when you use the breath to clean things out. Every time a new thought comes in that's not related to the breath, you're going to notice it. You may not notice it at first, you just kind of slip into it the way you normally have been. But as you get better and better at noticing the mind and noticing the warning signals that the mind is about to leave the breath, those warning signals tell you a lot about what's going on in the mind. It's as if a discussion took place maybe minutes ago, and it was decided, yes, we're going to leave the breath when we get our chance. And as soon as there's the slightest little bit of lapse in your mindfulness, you're gone. It's a fait accompli. But once you get sensitive to those little decisions, you can say no, you can change them in time. So look for that. The next time you notice that the mind has wandered and you bring it back, make up your mind that you're going to look for the warning signals. You don't tell yourself, okay, I'm going to stay with the breath, I'm never going to leave it this time. You're setting yourself up for a fall. There's a lie that's going on in the mind someplace. A wall was put up, and something's sneaking behind the wall. You've got to learn how to pull those walls down. And one of the ways of doing that is to ask, I want to see the warning signals. As soon as the breath gets a little bit wobbly or your focus on the breath gets a little bit wobbly, you have to be extra careful. And you begin to notice that certain decisions are being made, decisions that you weren't aware of before. It's in this way that we bring things to the conscious level, by laying down a few rules. We say, we're going to stay right here with the breath. And then watch the mind as it disobeys the rules, to see what kind of reasons it gives. At it doesn't give any reasons, it just does it right in your face. It suddenly switches in another direction. But if you can get more and more alert to the little things going on in the mind, the quieter you can get the mind, then the more clearly you can see these little decisions, both with the verbal fabrication and with mental fabrication. The feelings that come up, the little perceptions that come up, are like the subliminal messages on TV that come very quickly and then disappear. They plant a seed. If you're alert to them, you can wipe out the seed. It doesn't take much. It's harder, though, once the seed is sprouted and turned into a big plant. Then you have to uproot it, because it's established itself. But at the moment when it's still just a seed, it's just a little tiny decision that was made in the mind, and you can undo the decision right there, if you catch it in time. Otherwise, it starts burrowing around, ding other friends inside the mind, so it has its team, its gang. It's going to gang up on you. So you begin to see that the subconscious is not a place in the mind. It's not a subterranean dungeon. It's simply the mind's ability to do something very quickly, and then to pretend that it is forgotten. But if your mindfulness is more continuous, your alertness is sharper, and you're more and more determined to stay here, then the more clearly you see the tricks that the mind plays on itself, the way it hides things from itself, the way it's already shaping things. Independent co-arising, the factors of fabrication come prior to sensory contact. In other words, when they're unskillful, when they're done through ignorance, they've got you primed to sewer, no matter what comes to your senses, no matter what you see or hear or smell or taste or touch or think about. Once these little decisions are in place, they've got you primed to sewer. Now, if you can bring awareness and appropriate attention to this process, you can prime the mind in another direction. Appropriate attention is a matter of asking the right questions. Remember, the questions are not, who am I? Or where am I? The question is, what am I doing? That's how you prime the mind in another direction. Think about the Buddha on his way to awakening. The questions were never, who am I? Or where am I? The question was, what am I doing? He tried different methods of meditation, he tried different austerities, and he wasn't getting the results he wanted. So he turned around and said, what am I doing? What can I change? To see the little things that the mind was doing, he had to make the mind very, very quiet, in an all-around way. This is why the meditation involves getting focused on the breath and then being aware of the whole body, because different thoughts get associated with movements of energy in different parts of the body. They leave markers as we hold on to a thought for a bit. If you've got your awareness all around, and you've got the breath energy smoothed out, then there are fewer and fewer places to leave markers, fewer and fewer hiding places for the unskillful thoughts, urges, feelings, and actions with which you shape your experience. When you bring the light of awareness to these things, you can turn fabrication from a cause of sewering into part of the path. So always remember that the questions are not, who am I? Or where am I? The question is, what am I doing? And try to be really vigilant in being very precise in your answers. Bring things that the mind has been hiding from itself from behind the walls it's put up and into plain sight. This is what changes fabrication from a problem into the solution to the problem. So look carefully. No one else can do the looking for you. But if you look in the right places and ask the right questions, you're bound to see. In alignment with the Buddha's teachings, we underscore the tremendous significance of sharing wisdom widely. At present, we've converted this extensive 1,000-page work into a user-friendly audio format. The responsibility to advance this noble endeavor now lies with you. Through your subscriptions, likes, and the sharing of our content, you play a pivotal role in the widespread distribution of these teachings, benefiting countless others. Let's continue the age-old tradition of knowledge dissemination and the nurturing of mindfulness for the greater good of humanity. We wholeheartedly invite you to join us in this undertaking, and together, we can effect profound and positive changes in the lives of many.